Today we're practicing a skill that you're familiar with from the article of the week, and it's annotating and highlighting in a nonfiction article. The article I'm going to read to you today is My Students Are Struggling. Joint pain, migraines, vision impairment, and mental health are impacting student wellness during remote learning. And I can tell you from the title, this is going to focus on one of the many effects of virtual learning. So as I read, I'm going to pause to show you moments that I think are important, things that I'm going to want to keep track of in my gathering grid so I can keep notes on my articles. During the middle of an at home school day, Samika Gates' 11-year-old daughter Kylie suddenly broke down and started to cry while in class. Gates, who's a teacher, hurried to her middle schooler, turned off the camera, and went into full blown mom mode. We just sat there and I was like, "What's going on?" recalled Gates. And she said, "It's so much. I just don't know." Between exacerbated screen time, limited physical and social connection with friends, and a reading disability, remote learning has taken its toll on Kylie, who attends a Chicago public school's Montessori. At that point, I think we're all just very, very overwhelmed, she said. Gates, who also helps her son Ethan, who's in virtual kindergarten. I am going to highlight this because I always try to understand what an author is doing. I'm going to insert a comment here, and I'm just noting that this starts with a short story or an anecdote. And whenever a nonfiction article does that, I know that it's trying to highlight something about the bigger situation. So this is a story about one person, but I'm guessing it's meant to stand in for what's happening to a lot of people. Remote learning has been a challenging adjustment for many students, teachers, and parents since the COVID-19 pandemic started in March. But for students who are spending an inordinate amount of time, that means unusually high, in front of screens to learn, on top of managing the general anxieties that come with being an adolescent, overall wellness, whether mental, emotional, physical health, has in some cases been negatively impacted. All right, I know that an author is usually going to give me the main point early on in the story or in the text. So I'm going to note here in all caps, pretty sure I just found the main idea. What I'm going to do next is look for how the author proves this main idea or how the author supports this. According to a recent nationwide study on teacher and student wellness during the COVID-19 pandemic, 46% of teachers reported encountering student mental health concerns such as anxiety, depression, academic stress, trauma, and grief more often than they did before the pandemic. I'm going to stop anytime I see a number or a stat because I know that's one of the signposts. So I know that these are moments I may want to go back to. Teachers also noted their students' concerns for their external surroundings, such as food and housing insecurity, and fears that loved ones would be harmed or contract COVID 19, the study said. Physical issues from prolonged desk sitting are also ailing some students. Data was collected this summer from more than 2,100 full time teachers from 46 states. The teachers taught grades pre K through 12. Loyola University Chicago conducted the research in partnership with three other higher education institutions throughout the country. Kate Filippo, an associate professor at Loyola University Chicago's Georgetown School of Education and one of the study's co lead researchers, said the overview they got from the study is that kids are hurting in all kinds of ways. All right, this is another signpost. They're citing an expert here, and I'm just going to write that there's a variety of effects. And sometimes when I annotate, I'm just super brief, but I know when I go back to these notes, I'm just pointing out sections I want to reread. Particularly the combination of George Floyd's murder and the other events around that time with being out of school, it just contributed to it being a really frightening and disruptive time for a lot of kids, Filippo said. They're worrying about their safety, worrying about their loved ones' safety, worrying if they're going to be sick, wondering what's going to happen to them, to their schools. During the spring semester, when many schools shifted to remote learning schedules, 55% of the teachers surveyed in the report said they handled their students' wellness issues themselves, and it could be because teachers are seeing the students' lives like never before. They've got a really unique view on what is happening with young people right now, said Filippo, who worked in Chicago public schools as a social worker prior to being a professor. Charity Freeman, a computer science teacher at Lane Tech College Prep who instructs 7th through 12th graders, periodically hosts classroom culture days for her students. During this time, Freeman pauses the curriculum to check in on how her students are processing the climate around them. The most recent prompt in Freeman's Classroom Culture Day was, "How are you adjusting to remote learning?" The responses that I got were absolutely heartbreaking, said Freeman. That was when I learned that my students are struggling. Her high school students reported battles with depression, anxiety, and a myriad of physical ailments from sitting in front of the computer screen all day, like joint pain, headaches, and vision impairment. All right, I am going to highlight this just because the author keeps going back to these key points, I'm just going to take note here. I think that these are going to be a part of the biggest supporting points of this article. I have one student that I've still only seen one time in class, or maybe one, two, or three times since the start of the semester because he's been struggling with headaches and migraines, said Freeman. He has to see the doctor regularly, and now he has to upgrade his vision prescription. There are so many different things for students to have to navigate right now in terms of their own health. Wellness concerns and issues differ based on age and grade level too, said Freeman. For her 8th and ninth graders, their concerns are typically more anxiety based around the what ifs of remote learning settings, such as what if I'm not able to grasp the information I have on an exam, will I fail? And what if my teacher doesn't have a lot of time to meet outside of school for tutoring or one on one support? Whereas her upperclassmen students, the concerns may carry a bit more weight given the transitional time of life they're in, like worrying they won't get into their preferred college because they're fearful of going to a school building to take the SAT for health and safety reasons. Their concerns are very much just as tangible, just as real, but they have definitely deeper consequences because they're older and closer to the other side of the four walls of high school, said Freeman. I have so many students that are legitimately afraid to start the college application process, she said. According to the wellness study, 57% of the teachers responded that their students' trauma caused them personal distress, but addressing students' wellness concerns shouldn't only be coming from teachers who are also balancing the nuances of their own lives, explained Filippo. Having social workers, counselors, psychologists, and nurses visibly accessible to students and teachers in whatever way possible are going to make a positive difference. Usually, an argument article in some way will present a solution, so I'm just taking note that that's what's happening here. Lori Lanier, a school counselor at Woodson South Elementary School in Bronzeville, said that many of her students have been thriving in the remote learning setting. This is a change. I'm going to pause here because I just found a counterclaim. And a counterclaim is when the author seems to be arguing heavily in one direction and then suddenly they acknowledge that there's another side. She also regularly heard from them that they miss the social interaction of in-person learning facilities. It's been a big concern for the younger students. That would probably be the number one thing for elementary kids because school is so much, she said. Elementary school is fun, it's robust, they must have a field day or face painting. Not having the social physical engagement is difficult for them because they may not always take place when they leave the building. In a Gallup poll taken at the end of a disrupted 2019-2020 school year, 45% of parents said their child being away from peers and teachers was a major challenge to remote learning. Right, I'm going to pause here because I've got a number and stat, and this focuses on social well-being. Additionally, 44% of parents responded that their child's attention span or motivation was also challenged during remote learning. Before last school year was over, nearly 3 in 10 parents said their child was already experiencing harm to emotional and mental health due to their school being closed and social distancing, according to another poll from Gallup. The findings suggested that mental health concerns for students would be up the following school year. More than 1,200 parents of kindergartners through 12th grade students participated in both surveys. A month after the emotional breakdown, Gates and Kylie are in a better groove. Gates feels the breaking point was necessary for her to better assess and adjust to her daughter's needs. We're just getting into a routine and just getting her to a point where she feels comfortable, she said. I think we had to have a breaking point in order to figure out what was working, what's not working, and how we can fix it so we're not stressed all the time. All right, that's the end. And I'm just going to note that the conclusion is really a return to that original anecdote in the beginning of the story. So I'm going to make my final annotation here. And now what you're going to do is, in your own words, I want you to identify what you think the main claim of this argument is.